Welcome to the channel. I'm Randy Broussard, your host, and I have a very special guest with me today. It's a privilege to have Mr. Dave O'Brien with me, a longtime JFK assassination researcher. Actually, was very impressive to me. He started researching the assassination at age of 13. So he's very focused at a very young age. He's the author of two books. Back in 2019, his first one, Through the Oswald Window, in which he was given rare access to the so-called sniper's nest when it was locked and sealed to the public. And in addition, his latest, JFK Case Not Closed, with fellow researcher Johnny Carnes, examines the key physical evidence dismissed, ignored, altered, or suppressed, or all of the above by the Warren Commission to frame Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin of JFK. The book also documents how modern technologies not available back in 1963 are applied to the physical evidence in America's ultimate cold case and how it will change historical record of the events back in November of 22nd, 1963. It's a pleasure to have you here with me, Dave. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Randy. I appreciate your interest, and I'm glad to be with you and your audience.
Yes, and I know we have to jump through a couple of hoops before we got connected, but we're here. You
We are
know.
here.
Yeah, it's technology, huh? I want to start off by asking you, how did you get started? How did you? I mean, you've been interested in this case for as a very young age. What impressed you about it? What maybe stood out? How did you get started? And
Well, yeah, I was in grade six when he was assassinated. I was 11 years old. And back then, we studied American history more than our own history, I'm ashamed to say. And so I knew President Kennedy. I really liked him. And when he was assassinated, it was a shock. And so about 2 years after that happened, um, I there was a bookstore in downtown Toronto, a used bookstore, and the fellow that operated it was also into history quite a bit. He bought the Warren Commission, the all the volumes plus the summary edition, and he allowed me to come in after school and read a chapter and at a time, which I started doing, and that ended up going for about 17 months, and I read everything, like all the volumes, summary edition, everything, made copious notes, and from there I was hooked. And I started to write to people and didn't get many responses except for one from Dr. Malcolm Perry. And then and I was just hooked. And from that moment on, the thing that struck me the most, and you said it in describing the second book title, the thing that struck me and captured me was the totality of the evidence of the witnesses who, in fact, were either dismissed, ignored, altered, or suppressed by the Warren Commission to frame Lee Oswald as the lone assassin. One case I can give you that we don't have to get into, but it was Officer Bobby Hargis, the police motorcycle officer who was on the left rear bumper of the president's car at the time of the shooting. And his name does not appear in the summary edition of the Warren Commission, but he's instead buried in the, I think, volume 6 of the supplemental editions, which hardly anyone read. So most people read, of course, this 888-page summary edition. So there's just one example where where Bobby Hargis's testimony, which is suggests that the kill shot came from the right front. His name and his testimony does not appear in the summary edition, so nobody read it.
isn't it true that Hargis that he was like sprayed with blood and brain matter? I mean, he was actually riding behind the limousine. Is that correct?
Exactly. He was at the so if you go to the Zapruder film, he is directly over Jackie's left shoulder, and
Okay.
so he's to the left and to the rear of JFK. And as you just said, Randy, he was hit so strong by a spray of the president's blood and brain tissue that he nearly lost balance on his motorcycle. The spray coming back at him hit his sunglasses and the shield on his motorcycle, and he that told him, based on the positions of everyone involved, that the shot that caused that had to have come from the right front of the
Oh, sure.
limousine. And so he dismantled from his bike, or dismounted, mounted rather, and he went to the grassy knoll where he thought the shot came from, but he was too late. He didn't see anything. Reported that to the Warren Commission, and to the day he died, he said, "I believe the kill shot came from the right front. It had to have." And his testimony was dismissed by the Warren Commission because it didn't support Oswald being
Right.
the assassin to the rear of the car.
Exactly. And so many witnesses, maybe 40, 50, indicated that they thought the shot came from the front as well and weren't called in to testify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting about that, Randy? In addition to all, there was at least 58 witnesses who reported a shot to the right front of the car. And of course, the majority of witnesses said that they thought the shot came from the book depository building, which we know shots did come from there. But here's the really interesting thing, especially from the ear witnesses. Even ear witnesses who said they thought they heard the shots come from the book depository building, when asked to describe the spacing of the shots they heard, I'll just bang my hand and hopefully you can hear it. Here's how they described the spacing of the shots. They went like this. Now, that tells us that the second and third shots could not have come from the book depository building because the spacing was less time than the Oswald rifle could be operated manually to get off two shots. And so what happened? The Warren Commission just dismissed all the ear witnesses who's thought that the shot came from any location other than Oswald in the sixth floor southeast corner window of the depository.
Right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you were one of the very few researchers, people that were given access to the so-called sniper's nest, the Oswald window. I've been to Dallas several times, and I know it's all encased now. You can't get to the window. Um, what did you, I think you came to some interesting realization, or just a few minutes when you were there, where the Dallas police had been there before. FBI couldn't figure it out what was going on, or maybe refused to. Do you feel that you saw something different, or maybe another site that was the shot could have come from?
Yeah, there was two aspects to my visit there that just floored me. One was I was given the vantage point of the assassination through the eyes of the actual assassin at the sixth floor southeast corner window. I was able to have the window open. I was able to crouch down because you had to crouch down. You couldn't stand there and fire from your hip like Wyatt Earp. And that was one of the first things that I noticed. And so, in looking down into the kill site, I was shocked at what I saw in about two or three different regards. And then the last thing was that really stuck out was that I was there maybe 15 minutes by then, and I said that this is just a terrible sniper's nest for a lone assassin. I put that in quotes, air quotes, a lone assassin. And I couldn't. So I was there in 15 minutes, and I found a smarter, what I call a smarter sniper's nest for a lone assassin on the same floor at the opposite end of the building, the northwest corner. I'm sorry, the southwest corner window. And so it occurred to me that Oswald worked in the building for almost over 2 months prior to the assassination.
Right,
He would have scouted the whole thing. He would have. He was. They said that he was a marksman of sorts, and yet in 15 minutes I found a much smarter sniper's nest because he definitely had obstacles from firing from the southeast corner window, such as the oak tree, not taking the shot when the limousine was on Houston Street, a much easier shot. The time restrictions that he created for himself by allowing the car to make the left hand turn from Houston onto Elm Street, and then the final thing was the escape from that window. I was able to ascertain that while Oswald could have gotten to the second floor lunchroom in the 90 seconds the commission said he did, that his physical appearance after that 90 seconds suggests highly that he could not have been the assassin on the sixth floor and then gotten to the second floor 90 seconds later.
right, exactly. Now, I think you differ from many of your colleagues. And if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you feel Oswald may be involved, maybe not been involved in all this, or
Yes, I do think he was involved. I think he was a low level a person, and I think he was set up as the
Yeah.
lone assassin. But I think that um, for me to think that Oswald was set up by people that he had absolutely no knowledge of, who had access to his rifle to plant there, to had access to bullet shells that were placed there, the 3 bullet shells on the near the window. It's nonsensical. So what I believe is that Oswald was part of the assassination. His role was to set up that 6th floor assassination window, and then he was down in the 2nd floor lunchroom just as he insisted he was.
Right.
And what he didn't realize was that there was an assassin at the window, which he realized that that was going to happen. But what he didn't realize was that the assassin would get away and he would be set up as the person who was at that window when in fact he was not. So I do think he was involved, but he was set up as a patsy, just like he said he was.
Right. And also, like you mentioned about the expended the shells, uh, that basically they didn't line up the way they it was photographed. Correct.
Correct. There was that plus the rifle. I don't know if you've
Right.
ever noticed that there's no picture of the rifle where they found the rifle. They just have an outline. And so there's
Right.
a lot of suspicious things at
Oh
that site.
goodness.
But the shell casings weren't located where this is where Johnny Cairns really did some fantastic work for JFK case not closed. But the shell casings weren't lined up properly. One of the shell casings had a squeezing at the base and could not have been fired from that rifle on that
Exactly.
day.
Exactly.
And it just makes no sense at all. And of course, you've got, as Johnny points out, the the ownership of the shell casings through the processes of processing them for as evidence. That it is absolutely crazy. As well as the bullet from the found at Parkland Hospital, Oswald's rifle himself. There's just so much physical evidence that was mishandled at the time that all of it they used to pinpoint again Oswald as the assassin, whereas I'm not convinced.
Right. And also, isn't it true that when the police first arrived on the 6th floor, um, they identified the gun as a Mauser, correct?
Yes, they did. They did identify it. And, yeah, that's exactly right. And it was reported by like CBS and
Hmm.
other NBC, other news outlets that were back then. And yeah, Mauser. And then all of a sudden that disappears,
It
Randy.
disappears.
And we have Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle with only one palm print on it. Oswald has no nitrates on his cheek, which is representative of firing a rifle of that kind. If you bring it up and you point it and at your target, there's nitrates that go onto the cheek. There was none of that to be found. And so again, this is where Johnny Cairns really makes. What I like about Johnny is that he just looks at the physical evidence of the case and dismantles it as it would have happened had Oswald lived to stand trial. And I think that had Oswald lived to stand trial, as Johnny points out, we would have had a completely different outcome than what the Warren Commission, because nobody could question witnesses or offer
Right.
evidence in support of Oswald or in the physical evidence that was found. It was just all accepted what the Warren Commission told us.
He'd have definitely been acquitted in court of law with a good attorney, I'm
Oh, I
sure.
believe he, I
Yeah.
easily, I think, which would have been tragic because as we just talked about, I think he was involved. So I think for him to get off completely, I think would have been wrong.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned Johnny Carnes. I'm familiar with him. Never met him. I would like to one day. Um, he's from Scotland, and you're a fellow Scot yourself, aren't you?
Well, I'm Irish background,
Oh, okay.
but
Sorry.
we of course we both have this interest, and I became familiar with his work through other researchers. We've both been to Dallas on conferences, and but I just was drawn to his focus on the physicality, the evidence that way, because every all the books I don't know if you've noticed, but all the books that have been written over the years of late tend to focus on conspiracy theories,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that we've got to get back to the case itself. There's ample physical evidence, as Johnny points out, that can be studied and analyzed and still provide answers to what happened on in 1963, and that's where Johnny's focus is. And I think he is the researcher of the future because of that. We need to
Right.
go back to the evidence itself.
Right. And he, of course, contribute to your book, JFK Case Not Closed, correct?
He did four excellent chapters, again, all focusing on the physical evidence of the case. And he just completely dismantles the Warren Commission's conclusions and shows how the investigation itself was so
Yeah.
terribly flawed that had it
Oh,
got to a trial, there would have been
right.
problems.
Can you, we don't have a lot of time, but maybe um, can you give us an example of some of the evidence that he points out or
Sure. I
physical?
mean, you've got the bullet itself has never been matched to the Oswald the rifle. He points out the chain of custody and all the physical evidence that you
Oh,
can possibly name is just completely misrepresented by the Warren Commission. And in a court of law, chain of custody is an important matter. And so, because with if you've got a suspicious chain of custody, it indicates that there could be all kinds of mishandling and misrepresentation of information pertaining to that evidence. And so Johnny points out, it does a lot of pointing out about the rifle itself, Oswald's rifle, the CE 399, the magic bullet, the shell casings, everything you can think of that pertains to the physical evidence at that window. Johnny examines and takes it way further than what the Warren Commission did, and especially the rifle. That it yes, it was Oswald's rifle, but there's no evidence whatsoever that he fired it on that particular day
right.
or even knew that the rifle wasn't at his home garage.
Isn't it true that they didn't even test the rifle, um, check whether it was even fired that day?
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually they tested the rifle, and they were trying to establish, in particular, that well, first of all, could Oswald get off three shots in 5.6 seconds? The answer was possible, but
Yeah.
not likely,
No.
because
No way.
higher level marksmen from the FBI tried that and couldn't replicate what
Could,
Oswald allegedly
right.
did, and they could start shooting whenever they felt like it, whereas Oswald or whoever that assassin was at that window, had limited time. He had to start shooting when the president cleared the foliage of the oak tree. And between the time where he cleared the foliage of the oak tree and got to the overpass, that's when the shooting had to take place. That's a very limited period of time. And so, yeah, all these tests and everything, again, is part of all the evidence that was ignored, dismissed, altered, or suppressed
Right.
to name Oswald as the lone assassin.
Exactly. And where else do you feel, other than the grassy knoll? I think we established that there was definitely a shot from the front, but from behind. I hear a lot about. I think in your interview with Robbie Robertson as well, mentioned something about the Daltex building. You think that possibly that would be a better uh, tactical advantage?
Oh, for sure. And the reason being is I do think that there were two shots fired from the sixth floor southeast corner book depository window, for sure. But I also think there was at least one shot from the Daltex Records building. It's not clear whether it was from high up or the second or third floor. There was an outside stairwell that kind of blocks things. But a shot from that stairwell makes sense because, especially the shot that struck Governor Conley, or even the first shot fired that day that struck President Kennedy in the upper back, because the oak tree doesn't come into play from a shot from that
Right.
location, where the oak tree comes into play from an assassin shooting from the sixth floor southeast corner window.
Mhm.
Because at the time that the president is known to have been hit by the first shot, um, an assassin firing from the sixth floor southeast corner window has no view of the president at that time, but he does from the Daltex Records building. And that you mentioned earlier about the Daily Plaza 3D project that's coming, that will be coming soon. They do an analysis of all the shots in Daily Plaza, and they indicate very strongly that there had to have been a shot from behind at a
Right.
position other than the book depository building. And I think that where they're hinting at, because they don't want to tell everything
Mhm.
until they're ready, is the Deltex building. So I think you're right. I think you're going to find two
Yeah.
assassins to the rear, one assassin to the right front.
So how many assassins do you think were involved?
Three, I believe there was
Three.
three shots, 4 shots, three assassins.
Four shots.
But again, this project coming up is going to show us some interesting things. One of the things they shared with me, without the details, and so I'll only drop it as a hint for your audience, is that they believe that Connolly was hit by two separate shots,
Oh, sure.
and so that makes it at least five bullets that were fired. And they,
I
because
wouldn't be
the difference
surprised.
between them and me, yeah, the difference between them and me is they're able to document through these technologies that they
Hmm.
apply that where exactly the shot came from, the bullet trajectories, and the damage that would have resulted from those
Right.
shots. And so hopefully they'll be coming out later this year.
Exactly. I want to ask you about the surveys being conducted, just going back in 1964 after the Warren Commission report came out, where pretty much most of the general public backed it, believed it. Boy, that has flip flopped big time as we fast forward today. What 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 do you think happened? I know there were some series of events that took place from '64 until now that changed the public's opinion about this.
Well, there was three things, I think. One, you had independent researchers like Mark Lane, who managed to have a pretty high profile. And Mark Lane was going around. He's even on the show with Johnny Carson late at night.
Right.
And Mark Lane, I famously quote him. He said the best way to dismiss the Warren Commission report is to read it, and I found that to be the case when I was 13 or 14. So there was Mark Lane and other independent researchers like Penn Jones Jr., who was my host when I went to Dallas and went into the depository. Then the second thing that occurred was 1975, when Geraldo Rivera showed the Zapruder film for the very first time on national TV,
I saw
and
that. Yeah.
that flipped everybody, a lot of people. And when you see the Zapruder film, you got to keep in mind, Randy, that nobody saw the
Nobody
Zapruder
saw it.
film
Right. Exactly.
until for 12 years. And so the Warren Commission report had a 12-year head start on public opinion. And even like Look magazine and everyone else associated with the film never published any still photos even of the president's reaction after the fatal headshot. They only published photos up to frame
Right.
313. And so nobody ever saw any indication for 12 years that there had been this violent backward head movement, and possibly, well, how could that be caused by a shot from way behind, up and behind? And then the third thing that really started to get people swayed was Watergate. Watergate showed us that governments can lie and cheat and suppress and cover up, and that made the Kennedy assassination conspiracy possible. And so between those three things, like you said, Randy, things public trust is eroded. And I think we're presently now around 73, 74% of American public believes that there was more than one gun.
Yeah. And I know what you mentioned about you reading. I've read parts of the Warren report. I haven't read it all. Um, is it true that like the supplementary volumes, the hearings really don't match the report? Is that correct?
Not at all. Oh, does it ever? I mean, there was countless, even at age 13 and 14, it was so obvious to me that there was the supplemental volumes, 26 of them, contained evidence, testimony from witnesses, physical evidence, test results that were covered up, that suggested that there had to be an assassin at a location other than Oswald in that book depository building. The supplemental volumes are filled with it. And so here's the problem. They printed millions of copies of the 888-page summary edition, which is what millions of people read,
Right.
including me. They printed like literally only a few thousand copies of the supplemental editions. And they mostly went to libraries and historians.
Okay.
Very few people ever read that. And so their opinion was shaped on two things. reading the Warren Commission summary edition only, and number two, the media coverage, which was awful because all they did was basically report the 888 pages summary edition. Nobody went through the 26 volumes to say, hey, well, why isn't Hargis's testimony in here? Why was this ballistics test by the Warren Commission not mentioned?
So they
And
left it out, just left information.
and so it took years and years. And by then, public opinion had set in, as you indicated.
Right. One more question. We're running out of time. Time's going by so quickly. You think this case will ever be solved?
Yes, I do, for two reasons. One, new age researchers like Johnny Cairns, who aren't going to let it go, and that's important because time was not on our side for the longest time. And so I have great admiration for Johnny and his era of researchers. He's a bulldog, and I know he's going to stick with it. And the second thing is this technology, like this Daily Plaza 3D project. I've been exposed to it quite a bit. Could only mention so much of it in the book. It is phenomenal, and I think that we have other doctors like Dr. David Mantik, Dr.
Right.
Gary Aguilar, Dr. Michael Chesser. These are people who have had the more recent viewings of the JFK autopsy materials, and what they're discovering through new technologies applied to the photos and the x-rays and stuff like that is that it was not possible for there only to be one headshot the president received. And I think all that's going to come out. And I think it's technology is going to be the reason that it will come out. I don't know if it'll be before my age, because I'm now 72, but Johnny will follow up and it will happen. I believe we will know the truth sooner or later.
Well, that's great, and I probably won't see it either. I'll be 68 in October, so I'm right on your heels there. Dave, thanks again. And how do people get in touch with you? How do they find your books? And do you have a website or?
Yeah, I have a website. It's through the oswaldwindow.com.
Okay.
And there's a contact form that they can reach out to me if they wish. Both books are available there, and you click on a link, and it will take you to either Amazon or Barnes and Noble or a local bookstore, and you can pick up either book. And so I appreciate you doing that.
Okay. I certainly urge everyone to read it. Just uh, great information. Dave O'Brien, thank you so much. It's great to meet you. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Good to meet you too. Thank you, Randy. I appreciate your interest.